In 1857, the Rani of Jhansi, a warrior queen, will fight on horseback alongside her troops. She will inspire people, she will pull off daring escapes with her child strapped to her back, and ultimately she will die in battle. This is her story. So welcome back everyone. For those of you who don't know, I'm Lauren-Jane. I am a medical doctor and I usually make videos that fuse history with medicine. Now today we are talking about MANIKARNIKA TAMBE. We don't know exactly what year she is born. We think it might be 1828, but it also might be 1835. What we do know is that she's born in the holy town of Varanasi in northern India. So it seems like her mother dies at the age of 4 and she's raised by her father. Now he is a court of advisor in the court of Peshawar. So she's from an established family. Now she has a very unusual upbringing, especially for the time. And this isn't just an Indian society thing. This is, I mean, think about the whole world, especially the West in the 19th century. Women have a certain type of education, and that is the same in India. You know, people are doing things like embroidering and being taught how to run the household. That is not the education that she is getting. She is getting an education where she is being taught to fight with swords. She is being taught how to handle a horse. She's mixing with the boys. This is the education that her father is creating for her. Now, what we do know is that she gets married quite young. She might have been 7, she might have been 12. Obviously, we're not entirely sure what year she's born, so we don't know. But she does get married young. His name is Rao, and they have a son together. But she does not content just to, you can imagine, I'm sure, she's not content just to decide that she is now a married woman and that she embroiders and sits alone and raises her son in the household. She doesn't do any of that. She continues to attend military drills, and she actually rejects the Purdah system. This is a system in India where women are kept separately from men. This is a very established system in her period, and she wants to meet people face to face. She's not interested in this. And also, and again, I want you to think about women all across the world, not just in India. She rejects the caste system. She mingles with people of a lower social status than her. How many women in England in this period who were, you know, ladies, you know, that were mingling with, you know, people from lower social class? They mostly weren't doing that, somewhere, but mostly, you know, men have had those sort of freedoms. Artistic people have those sort of freedoms, but for the most part, ladies are, in whatever society, tend to be kept quite cloistered away, and that is not what is happening here. Now, very sadly, her own child dies and her husband adopt a baby boy. Now, this is a crucial part of the narrative, this adoption. Now, if you think about any kind of royal system, not even going so far as royal, any kind of lineage system, it is incredibly important to pass things to an heir. This is crucial. We have this all the way through any type of history. Think about how crazy Henry VIII is about getting a son, okay? This is how the British are going to pull apart India. Now, this is where it gets really interesting on a political scale. Now, I'm going to take you slightly away from the Rani for a second, because we need to look at the wider political climate about what's going on in India in order to be able to pick her back up in a minute. Now, the first entity that we need to consider, and these guys are fantastic villains is what I'm going to call them. If you want to pick a villain in history and it's not the Nazis, it's going to be the East India Company, guys. So the East India Company is formed actually really long time ago. We tend to think of them as being involved in India in kind of the 18th and 19th centuries, but actually they're formed in the year 1600. That's when they get their royal charter, actually. And the idea of them is that they are a trading body, and we, as Britain, we want to be trading with China and India. Obviously, you know, this is the period of kind of Elizabeth I. We've really got our eyes as a country set on exploration. We're exploring the Americas, we're exploring, you know, pushing as far as China and India. And the East India Company has been developed to provide Britain with the things that it wants. Now it's looking for things like spices, it's looking for tea. And so the East India Company is created, but the East India Company, as we know, is not going to stay in its lane, and it is going to become the vehicle for massive levels of imperialization. It's not just us who's interfering in India and China in this period. I kind of feel like I need that meme where it's the Harry Potter one where you get, it's always you three. It is always in India and China at this period, the British, the Dutch and the Portuguese. Now, we are even going to go to war with the Dutch because we are trying to stake territory in places like India and China. Now, what happens is over the next 100 years, our presence in India will develop from being a trading body and will culminate In 1612 and 1615, East India Trading Company is really working with the Mughal emperors to try and create a trade deal to deal in things like cotton and spices. But the whole thing will culminate in the year 1757 in a battle, and at that point it goes from being a trading body to being, it has its own army, and it is becoming at this point a force of oppression in India. In 1757, we have the Battle of Plassey. Now, company troops are commanded by Robert Clive, and he basically is able to gain what is a very lucrative area in the Bengal. And then there is a second victory, which is called the Battle of Buxar. That's in 1764. And that, again, extends the company's regional influence. Now, the company then begins to delve into the political arena of India's infrastructure. And this is now we are seeing the East India Company acting as a colonial body functioning in India at this point. Now, over the next century, a lot of Indian territory is brought under direct rule by military conquest. We are using, as the East India Company, we are using our troops to now take over, in a military sense, large parts of India. So there are plenty of wars. There are the Mysore Wars, the Maratha Wars, and the Sikh Wars, and we consolidate, and the East India Company consolidates a lot of power in the south, the southwest, and the northwest. Now, other than military conquest, what the company is using is they are allowing princely states to continue. So what that is it's an original state that is ruled by its Hindu ruler, and the East India Company are kind of on the sides. They are kind of negotiating with them, but more and more and more there is a British authorial power. Other than that, we have princely states, principalities, and these are being ruled by their original rulers. These are Hindu princes that are ruling these. But the British power keeps on encroaching. Now, what the East India Company are doing is they are continuing to trade. They hold a lot of, obviously, military power, but they are also brokering deals, and step by step they are taking power from these principalities. Now, one of the ways they do this, and this is where we come back to the Rani, is the doctrine of lapse. Now, we talked earlier about how important it is for people to be able to pass down their property and their titles to their children. So what the East India Company were doing in this period was deciding that if you did not have your own biological heir, that's it, you cannot pass it down. And we know how difficult that is, because obviously in this period, a lot of people suffer with fertility issues, and there's no vaccinations. Lots and lots of children die. So it's very common in this period across the world, not just in India, for two people, a couple who are married who don't have any children, to take their nephew and give them kind of the estate and the title and things like that. What they have done very cleverly by introducing this doctrine of lapse is saying, if you don't have a child to pass it down to, it comes to us. It's incredibly devious, because it doesn't require you to send any men into battle. Now, by 1857, the Indian nation is pretty fed up with this behaviour, and who can blame them? Now, I have to be really careful with the nomenclature here, because if you look in the British textbooks, the Western textbooks, this is called an Indian rebellion. Rebellion is a word that very much you almost use for naughty children. People are not doing what they should. The Indians, for them, this is a war of independence, not a rebellion. And so I'm going to try and use those terms going forward rather than the word rebellion. But whichever way you look at it, there is a conflict that happens in 1857. Now, this begins in Meerut by Sepoy's Indian troops who are in the service of the British East India Company. So these guys work for the East India Company, and they are not treated well. Now, British paramountcy is introduced in about 1820. We do get a shuffle at some point between the East India Company and that being taken over by the British government, because the East India Company were pretty naughty in general, not just to the Indians. And so the British government eventually steps in and says, go away, we now are just going to take all of your lands, and that is what they do. The British have got incredible power in India, and they're increasingly introducing Western ideas. We've got missionaries introducing Christianity, all these kind of things. And we have, as a nation, we have our idea as to how India should be governed and how people should live. And I think obviously in 2025, we know that you kind of can't live like that. You have to let people live the way they want to live, and there is value in other people's traditions and cultures. And that is not the thought, obviously, that these guys thought as they are going across the world from 1600 to kind of 1900. They've got no respect for anything and anyone that's not British, and that really reaches a kind of culmination by 1857. Now, the Rani, obviously we come back to her, we know that she has been subjected to this rule of this doctrine of lapse. And she fights back against that with good reason, I think. So rebellion reaches her in the spring of 1857, and she leads an uprising of farmers, soldiers and townspeople against the British. So Field Marshal Hugh Rose, who commands the British forces, so he finds her fort well defended. She's a good military commander, she's clever, she knows what she's doing. So he demands the surrender of the city and threatens to destroy it if command is refused. And in response, she says this, and I love that we have this because this is her speaking to us. Because so often in these videos, like I don't know if you saw my Pocahontas video, but so often, especially with people of ethnicity, their voice is lost because the history is written by us effectively, but we do have her voice, and this is what she says. "We fight for independence. In the words of Lord Krishna, we will, if we are victorious, enjoy the fruits of victory. If defeated and killed on the field of battle, we shall surely earn eternal glory and salvation." Now, on March 25th, Rose, he lays siege to Jhansi, and in spite of the vigorous defence, the British do break into the city. But she holds them back, she really does. And before they could get to a final assault, she straps her adopted son to her back and escapes from the fortress as the city burns. Now, there is another lady I would like to bring to your attention at this point. Her name is Rani Bai. Now, she is another lady, and she is, we think, born in 1830, and she looks a lot like the Rani. They could be twins. And she is really brave. So this is very much a Star Wars kind of Padme move with her handmaiden. So what she basically does is she pretends to be the Rani, and she launches herself into battle, and she's obviously a target, and she's setting herself out to be a target, and in the meantime the Rani is able to escape. So another incredibly brave woman who we should be aware of. You know, when I was reading, you know, about these two women, I was just so inspired, and I couldn't wait to make this video to kind of show you how great these women are, because, you know, we know a lot about Western history. You know, what do you not know about Catherine Parr and Anne Boleyn? And, you know, sure, they did great and interesting things, but there are women across the world who aren't British or aren't, you know, Western or European, who are doing really cool things. And that's kind of what I want to do with this channel, is to find people for you who are really interesting and really spark your kind of curiosity. Now we move a year later. Now we're in June of 1858. So Rose is still, this guy Hugh Rose, he's still on the Rani's case. He's kind of following her around, and his troops now attack Gwalior. I hope I pronounced that correctly. At the request of the other rebel leaders, the Rani, she leads a counter-charge with what remains of her contingent to stop Rose effectively. And on the second day of fighting at Kotaki Sarai, she is shot from her horse and killed, and Gwalior falls soon after. Now, according to the British historians John Kay and John Mallion in the History of the Indian Mutiny, which is written in 1890, which is why I like this as a source, it isn't an eyewitness account. It isn't, obviously we're looking a good 30 years later, but it is a better resource than, you know, Wikipedia. They say that she was clad in the attire of a man and mounted on horseback. Now, the accounts differ on whether she was struck by a sabre or whether she was struck by a bullet. But this is the last battle in the First Indian War of Independence. Now, in the British press, of course, she's really maligned. You know, how dare she? And if you did watch this throws up a lot of kind of Pocahontas vibes for me, this video, because when we looked at Pocahontas, we talked about how she was an example of this is a Western legend, the way that Pocahontas has risen, because this is not a Native American legend that has risen through their own ranks and just gained prominence. Pocahontas is an example of kind of a good indigenous person, in that she helps the imperialists always at the expense of her own tribe. And so Pocahontas is very glorified in her own day by the Queen, by people in London. They really love her because that's how they want all Native American people to behave. And you get the opposite of that with the Rani. She is defending her own people. You know, she is not interested in imperialism. She's defending Indians. And so obviously in the British press, she's completely slaughtered. They call her the Jezebel of India. And I wanted to draw attention to this because obviously we have a habit. When a woman is powerful, you kind of use like sexual kind of overtures to kind of bring her down. Now, I am a theologian, so just to be very clear, so you can scrape the Jezebel language, you can scrape Jezebel back to, she probably wasn't actually sexual, she's just a queen. The reason that I use that word is because in our language, we use the word Jezebel to mean prostitute. Jezebel was not a prostitute, she was a queen. I will make a video about this, this just occurred to me. But anyway, so we call her the Jezebel of India in England, but actually Hugh Rose, do you remember him? The guy that was attacking her for over a year? He didn't think that at all. This whole conflict between the Rani and Hugh Rose really reminds me of kind of like Richard Lionheart, Coeur de Lion and Saladin, because they were mortal enemies, but they were both incredible military commanders. And the rumour was always that they had a lot of respect for each other, or that they were mortal enemies because they were both such incredible warriors. And you kind of see this with Hugh Rose, and this is what he says about her. He called her personable, clever and beautiful, the most dangerous of all Indian leaders. Now, I just think that really speaks for itself, in that, you know, she was his enemy, she really set him to a lot of trouble, and after she had gone, he had a lot of respect for her. So the British press can say what they want. This guy faced her and he thought that she was ferocious and incredible. Now, Colonel Mallison, he later writes in the History of Indian Mutiny, Volume 3, London, 1878. So again, as sources go, we are now closer to the event. Whatever her faults in British eyes may have been, her countrymen will ever remember that she was driven by ill treatment into rebellion, and that she lived and died for her country. I mean, what more can you say about her than this? You know, she has not done this for glory. She's defending her people because they are being treated badly, and she gives her life to the cause. And she's an amazing woman, and I hope as you're watching this video you agree with me. I want to give a minute or two to Hugh Rose's account of her last stand, because I think it's important to have that first-hand account. So this is the death of the Rani of Jhansi, and this is how Hugh Rose describes it. So, amongst the fugitives in the rebel ranks was the resolute woman who, alike in council and on the field, was the soul of the conspirators. Clad in the attire of man and mounted on horseback, the Rani of Jhansi might have been seen animating her troops throughout the day, when inch by inch the British troops pressed through the defile, and when reaching its summit, Smith ordered the hussars to charge. The Rani of Jhansi boldly fronted the British horsemen. She is not afraid. And that's from a guy that was there. When her comrades failed her, her horse, in spite of her efforts, carried her along with the others. With them she might have escaped, but that her horse, crossing the canal near the cantonment, stumbled and fell. A hussar close upon her track, ignorant of her sex and her rank, cut her down. She fell to rise no more. That night her devoted followers, determined that the English should not boast that they had captured her, even dead, burned the body. And so, you know, she doesn't fall from a lack of military strategy or anything like that. She's just really unlucky. Her horse stumbles, and some guy, it sounds, who doesn't even know who she is, some random hussar, manages to take her out. It's just really sad. Thus died the Rani of Jhansi. My opinion of her has been recorded in the preceding page. Whatever her faults of British eyes may have been, her country, we already read this bit, will have believed that she was ill driven by treatment into rebellion, and that her cause was a righteous cause, and that the treatment she received at the hands of Lord Dalhousie was one of the main causes of the disaffection in Bundelkhand and central India in 1875-8. To them she will always be a heroine. I haven't really touched on it. Lord Dalhousie, he's really the guy that's kind of, you know, putting in place this doctrine of lapse and things like that. So he's her main political adversary, and that is kind of how the story of her concludes with her death. I really wanted to make a video about her because I think she was an incredible woman, and in the West we don't always know enough about these women, especially when they did things that our kind of states didn't agree with, so these women are vilified. Jezebel is a brilliant example. You know, if you look at the story of Jezebel, she is a queen, and she is a queen on the wrong side. She is the enemy, and so down the centuries her name means whore effectively, and she wasn't a whore. And the Rani of Jhansi was an incredible woman. You know, she might have been afraid, but she was bold and brave, and these are seasoned military commanders that are saying this about her. So I hope you have very much enjoyed learning about her. I would love to know your comments on this one, and I can't wait to see you next week. Please do like and sub, share the video to anyone who you think might like it. It really does help small channels like mine, and I can't wait to see you all next week.